The invasion fleet of the Verkai Dominion arrived at the Sol system on the 14th day of the 7th cycle, precisely on schedule, precisely as planned, and precisely as rehearsed in 400 simulated deployments across the past 3 decades of preparation. Supreme Commander Dreth had planned this moment for most of his adult life. He stood on the bridge of the undying verdict, the largest warship the Verkai had ever constructed, and looked at the blue and white planet turning slowly in the viewport, and felt the deep satisfaction of a predator who has cornered prey that did not know it was being. Earth, the death world. He had heard the whispers, of course. Every species in the known galaxy had heard the whispers. Humans were dangerous. Humans were unpredictable. Humans came from a world that tried to kill them every day and had simply made them stronger for it. The Galactic Council muttered about Deathworlders in the same tone they used for natural disasters and unstable stars. Drath did not believe in whispers. He believed in numbers. He believed in preparation. He believed in the 73 warships positioned behind him, the 12 orbital bombardment platforms charged and ready, and the 400,000 ground troops waiting in deployment bays for the signal. He had studied human military history with great thoroughness. He knew their tactics, their weapons, their documented range of responses to threat. He knew their population centers, their command structures, their communication networks. He had modeled this invasion 400 times. He had never lost a simulation. What he had not modeled was an empty planet. First contact protocol, Drath said, and his communications officer opened the standard hailing frequencies. He waited. He waited longer. He checked the frequencies. Hailed again. Nothing. Not interference. Not jamming. Not a military silence that suggested defensive preparation. It's simply nothing. "Sir," his sensor officer said, and the quality of her voice made Drath turn. She was staring at her display with an expression he had never seen on her face in 11 years of service. The expression of someone receiving data that the equipment must surely have generated in error. "Report," Drath said. "Surface scan is complete," the sensor officer said. She said it slowly, the way people spoke when they were not sure the words would make sense when they left their mouths. "Population readings are negligible." She looked up. "The planet is largely empty, sir." The bridge was very quiet. "Define negligible," Drath said. The sensor officer looked back at her display. "We are reading approximately 40,000 life signs across the entire planetary surface." She paused. "For context, sir, pre-invasion intelligence estimated Earth's population at 9.8 billion. The bridge was even quieter. Drath looked at the planet, then at his sensor officer, then back at the planet. "Where did they go?" he said. Nobody answered because nobody knew. The ground teams went down anyway. This was protocol. It did not sit in orbit with a fleet of 73 warships because the sensors said the planet was empty. You verified, sent boots to the ground and eyes to the surface, and you made absolutely certain before you made any decisions. Commander Veth led the first reconnaissance unit into what the human databases had labeled London, United Kingdom. She had studied the city extensively. She knew its population had been approximately 9 million. She knew its layout, its transport networks, its military installations. She had expected urban combat. She had expected resistance. I'd expected, at minimum, to find people. She found a city. The city was intact. That was the first strange thing. Gah. There had been no bombardment, no obvious evacuation and panic, no signs of the rapid, disordered departure that characterized populations fleeing disaster. The buildings stood. The infrastructure was intact. The streets were clean. They were also completely empty. Veth walked down the center of what her maps identified as Oxford Street and heard nothing but the wind and the sound of her own boots on the pavement and, somewhere in the distance, a bird. She looked in shop windows. The merchandise was still displayed. She looked into cafes and saw cups on tables, chairs arranged for customers, menus propped up at the counters. No customers. She found a newspaper stand. The papers were still there. The top one dated 3 weeks before the invasion fleet had entered the Sol system. She picked it up and looked at it. The headline was in English, which her translator rendered as, "Humanity's Great Departure. Final preparations complete." She read it twice. Then she opened her comm. "Command," she said, "you need to see this." Supreme Commander Drath read the article on his bridge while his fleet held position in orbit and his ground teams across the planet sent back. Variations of the same impossible report. Empty cities, intact infrastructure. Out. No signs of panic or disorder. And everywhere, in newspapers and posted notices and messages left on public displays, the same words. Great departure. They knew, his intelligence officer said. It was a small, methodical Verkai named Sessin, who had spent 30 years compiling data on human behavior, and who was currently sitting very still. In the way he sat when something had destabilized his fundamental assumptions. They knew we were coming, sir. They have known for some time. How long? Dreth said. Sessin pulled up the collected documents his teams had been transmitting from the surface. The earliest reference I can find to preparations is approximately 4 years ago, he said. The first public announcement of what they called the Great Departure was made approximately 18 months ago. He paused. It appears to have been a coordinated global decision. Drath looked at him. 9.8 billion people. Coordinated departure. In 4 years. Yes, sir. Where did they go? Sessin was quiet for a moment. That is what I cannot determine from the surface materials alone. He pulled up a series of documents. They were careful about what they left behind. There are references to destinations throughout the documents, but they are not specific. He looked at Drath. They did not want us to know where they went. Drath looked at the planet below him, the beautiful, intact, completely empty planet. He had prepared for war. He had prepared for resistance. He had prepared for every documented human military response in 400 simulations. He had not prepared for this. Find me something, he said. Find me anything that tells me where 9.8 billion humans went. It was Veth who found the archive. She found it in what her maps labeled the British Museum, in the center of London, in a room that had clearly been prepared for exactly this purpose. The room was clean, well lit by emergency power that was still running, and contained a single object on a single table, a data storage device. Verka compatible. They had built it specifically so she could read it. She stood there looking at it for a long moment. Then she picked it up and opened the file. The file contained a message. A video message. A human face appeared on the display. A woman of middle age with dark eyes and gray threading through her hair, wearing clothes that were simple and practical. She was sitting in a chair in what appeared to be a library, and she was looking directly at the camera with the expression of someone who has a great deal to say and has chosen her words very carefully. She spoke in Galactic Common. Hello, the woman said. My name is Dr. Amara Osei. I was the Secretary General of what we called the United Earth Council for 11 years, and I am recording this message specifically for whoever arrives on Earth after us. I am recording it in Galactic Common because we know you will be able to read it and because we want to be very clear. She paused, not threatening. Clear. She leaned forward slightly. We have known about the Verkai Dominion for 6 years, she said. We have known about your intentions for Earth for 4. We have known the approximate timing of your arrival for 18 months. We have spent those years making a decision that I suspect you did not anticipate. She smiled, and it was a very specific kind of smile, the kind that knew something you did not. We decided not to be here when you arrived. Let me explain what you have inherited, Dr. S.A. said. Earth is a Class 12, hazardous world. It has always been one. Our atmosphere, our gravity, our biological environment, our weather systems. The vast majority of our flora and fauna, none of it is compatible with most Confederation species. You will have noticed this already, I imagine, if your ground teams have landed. She folded her hands. The planet you have captured is not a prize. It is a trap, not one we built. One that has simply always been there. She clicked to the next section. The bacteria in our soil will begin affecting your troops within approximately 72 hours of unprotected surface exposure, she said. Your environmental suits will provide partial protection, but our environment is very creative about finding gaps. Our rainfall carries compounds that are benign to us and mildly corrosive to most Verkai materials. Our sunlight spectrum, at ground level, produces cumulative cellular damage in Verkai biology at rates that will begin causing symptoms within 2 weeks of unshielded exposure. Our wildlife, she said, and paused for effect, is exactly what you have heard it is. The large predators are the obvious concern. The insects, the fungi, the bacteria, the parasites, These are the ones that will actually cause you lasting difficulty. She looked at the camera steadily. You have captured a world that requires full environmental protection to inhabit, she said. A world that will fight you every single day, at the cellular level, with more creativity and persistence than any military force we could have deployed. We know this because we spent 100,000 years fighting it ourselves, and we still were not entirely winning when we left. She uncrossed her hands. We left you the cities, she said. The infrastructure is intact and operational. The libraries are intact. Databases are intact. We left those intentionally because we are not cruel. We left you everything we built because we know that what we built does not come with what we are. She paused. You have captured our home. You have not captured us. A world without us in it is simply a very beautiful, very dangerous, very expensive piece of real estate that will require more resources to maintain than you will ever extract from it. We want you to understand something, she said. This is not a defeat for us. We left. We chose to leave. We spent 4 years moving 9.8 billion people to locations that you do not know and that we are not going to tell you about. And we did it cleanly and completely and without panic, because that is the kind of species we are when we have time to plan. She smiled again, and it was different this time. Quieter. Almost warm. We are very good at endurance. We always have been. We can wait. She leaned back. We will return when it suits us, she said. In the meantime, Earth is yours. She spread her hands, an open gesture. Enjoy it. She clicked the display off. The message ended. Veth stood in the empty museum in the empty city on the empty planet and looked at the blank screen for a long time. Then she opened her Commander Veth. To Supreme Commander Drath, she said. I have found the archive. You need to hear this. Drath watched the message 3 times. The bridge around him was completely silent throughout all 3 viewings. When the message ended for the 3rd time, he sat in his command chair and looked at the empty planet in the viewport and said nothing for a very long time. Sesson was the first to speak. She is correct about the environment, he said. Medical is already reporting early-stage exposure symptoms in 2 of the ground teams that were operating without full protection. He paused. Our suits were rated for Class 9 hazard environments. Earth is Class 12. Drath said nothing. She is also correct about the infrastructure cost, Sesson said. Running the atmospheric processors alone to make the cities habitable for our species will require more energy output than the entire Verkai home system currently generates. He looked at his datapad. I have been running the numbers since the ground teams began reporting. He turned the pad toward Drath, not to show him the specific figures, but so that Drath could see from Sesson's expression what the figures contained. The math does not work, sir. Drath looked at the planet. 30 years, he said, very quietly. He had planned this for 30 years. He had built this fleet, trained these soldiers, gathered this intelligence, run these simulations. He had risen through the ranks of the Verkai military on the promise of this victory. His career, his legacy, 30 years of his life, and the humans had simply left. They left a message, his communications officer said. And there was something in her voice that Drath could not immediately identify. Something that sounded almost like reluctant admiration. They left it in our format, on our compatible hardware. They wanted to make sure we could read it. They wanted us to understand, Sesson said. They wanted us to stand here, Drath said slowly, in their empty cities, reading their message, surrounded by an environment that is quietly trying to kill us, and understand exactly what they had done. He was quiet. That is what they wanted. Yes, Sesson said. And then he said something that Drath would remember for the rest of his life, sir. I have studied humans for 30 years. I have read every document, every record, every intercepted communication. I believed I understood them. He looked at the planet. I understood their weapons. I understood their tactics. I did not understand this. Drath looked at him. Explain what you did not understand. Sesson thought for a moment. Humans, he said, are persistence predators. This is their most fundamental biological characteristic. They do not win through superior speed or strength. They win by continuing when other species stop. By choosing a path and following it through every obstacle, every setback, every logical argument for abandoning it, until the path ends or they do. He looked at the planet. I understood this about them physically. I did not understand it strategically. He set down his datapad. They spent 4 years moving their entire species, he said. 9.8 billion individuals. Every one. Coordinated across every nation, every culture, every political division that has defined their history. I know how difficult it is for 3 Verkai officers to agree on a lunch destination. He paused. I cannot fully comprehend what it required for humans to agree unanimously on moving their entire civilization. But they did it, because the alternative was fighting us. And they calculated that fighting us was not the optimal path. He looked at Drath. They did not run, he said. Running implies fear. Running implies disorder. What they did was strategic withdrawal to favorable ground, the way their best military commanders have done throughout their history. They retreated without retreating. He paused, and they left us the bill. Drath looked at the planet one more time. Recall the ground teams, he said. Begin cataloging the exposure cases and start them on treatment. Plot a return course for home. We are withdrawing, sir, the navigation officer said carefully. We are withdrawing, Drath confirmed. He looked at the planet one last time. He had planned for 30 years to conquer a world. He had found an empty one, a message in a museum, and 73 warships full of troops who were already beginning to show symptoms of exposure to an environment that had spent 100,000 years perfecting its defenses against anything that was not human. He had not lost a simulation in 30 years. It also never simulated this. The report Drath filed upon returning to Verkai space was the most unusual document the Dominion's military command had received in 200 years. It was thorough, it was accurate, it was deeply humiliating, and it was the truth, because Drath was a professional, and professionals filed accurate reports even when the reports were humiliating. The report contained one recommendation, 3 words long. Do not return. The second team Drath had sent down, led by a young officer named Preth, who had been on her first field assignment, had been given the city of Tokyo. She had walked through it for 6 hours before filing her report, and the report she filed was the one that Drath remembered most clearly. Even years later, because of a single line at the end of it, Preth had written, "The city is perfectly maintained. The systems are running, the trains are on schedule." I checked. The automated systems are running the transit network on its normal schedule. 2 empty platforms on a planet with no passengers. She had paused in her report. Then she had written, I watched a train arrive at Shinjuku Station, and the doors open, and then close and the train depart. I watched this 4 times. I am not sure why I watched it 4 times. I think I was hoping someone would get on. Nobody had gotten on. The trains were still running when the fleet departed. Drath thought about that sometimes. About the trains running on their schedule through empty cities, waiting for passengers who were not there, operated by automated systems that did not know the passengers had gone. I thought about the kind of civilization that built systems so robust and so thoroughly automated that they kept running without anyone present to run them. He thought about what it meant to build something meant to outlast you. The monitoring satellites had captured something else. In the final weeks before the Verkai fleet arrived, the satellites had detected an unusual pattern of activity, not evacuation, not military preparation, music, broadcast simultaneously from thousands of locations across the planet. Every style, every tradition, every language and instrument and voice that 9.8 billion people had ever used to make sound that meant something, playing all at once across the whole planet in what the humans had called the last concert. It had lasted 72 hours. Then it had stopped. Then the planet had been quiet. Sesson had listened to the recordings for 3 days, filed a note in the archive, said, I do not know what the last concert was meant to communicate. I have been listening to the recordings for 3 days, and I am no closer to understanding. I am not certain understanding is the point, he added at the bottom. I believe they were saying goodbye to a place they loved. I believe they did it the way they did everything else, completely, and together, and as loudly as they could manage. The recordings were the most accessed file in the Verkai military archive for the next decade. A young officer named Vreth, who had been on her first deployment, filed a note that said simply, I think I understand now why the Council was afraid of them. It was never the weapons. Somewhere that was not Earth, in a settlement that had been built with extraordinary speed over 4 years of unified human effort. Dr. Amara Asay sat in a chair in a room that smelled of wood and the particular kind of coffee that could only be grown in earth soil, which they had brought with them because some things were non-negotiable. She was reading a transmission. The Verkai fleet had arrived, held position, sent down ground teams, recalled the ground teams, and departed. The entire process had taken 11 days. Her assistant entered. "The Verkai have gone," he said. He was young, born in the first year of the Great Departure, and had never technically lived on Earth. "What do we do now?" Ase looked at the two-mooned sky outside her window. "We do what we have always done," she said. She stood up with the straightening of the spine that meant there was work ahead. "We build, we settle, we learn this place." We looked at her assistant, and we wait. "Well, how long?" he asked. She thought about 4 years of organized global migration, about 9.8 billion people who had looked at an invasion. Fleet and decided the optimal response was to simply not be there. "Long enough," she said. "It's not forever." 3 years later, the Galactic Council received a diplomatic communication from an entity designating itself the Human Collective, transmitted from coordinates not on any Confederation chart, requesting formal recognition as a member species in good standing. The communication was polite. It was thorough. It addressed every standard requirement for Confederation membership with careful documentation. It contained one additional note at the end. The note said, "We would like the record to reflect that we have never actually left the Confederation. We simply relocated temporarily. Consider our membership to have been continuous throughout." The Council debated this for 3 weeks. They approved the application. On the two-mooned world, a child who had been born during the Great Departure asked her grandmother what Earth had been like. The grandmother was old enough to remember the day the decision had been made, old enough to have stood in a city still full of people and looked at the sky and thought, "We have to go." She thought about her apartment, the sound of the street below in the morning. She thought about the smell of rain that came in from the sea. She thought about the quality of light in the late afternoon and the particular color of the dust roads she had walked as a child, and the way certain trees looked against a sky that was specifically exactly the right color of blue. She thought about a planet that had tried to kill humans every day for 100,000 years, and that they had loved anyway. The way you loved things that were difficult, the way you loved things that made you stronger by demanding everything you had. It was very beautiful, she said finally. And it was ours, and we will go back to it someday. "Will it still be the same?" the child asked. The grandmother looked at the two-mooned sky. "It will be waiting for us," she said. "That is what home does. It waits." The Galactic Council's formal recognition of the Human Collective was celebrated in the settlement with a level of enthusiasm that required 3 separate safety briefings about noise ordinances, all of which were received with great respect and completely ignored. There was music, there were fireworks, there was coffee, which remained the most traded commodity the Human Collective possessed, and which had in 3 years become the most sought-after import in 6 separate star systems. Dr. Amara Osei stood at the edge of the celebration and watched her people celebrate. She thought about a train arriving at an empty platform, the doors opening and closing, the train departing. She thought, "We will go back. Not soon. The work here was not done. But someday, on their own terms. When it suited them." She smiled and went back to the celebration because her people were celebrating, and she was one of them, and there was music playing in the night. It was warm, and the coffee was good. Tomorrow, there would be work. There was always work. He was very good at work. They all were. In the Verkai Military Archive, the last concert recordings were still the most accessed files a decade later. A young intelligence analyst named Weth wrote in her personal log, "I have listened to the recordings 114 times. I am beginning to think I need to listen to them differently, not as intelligence, as something else. I do not have a word for what the something else is. I think the humans might." She put in a request for a cultural exchange program with the Human Collective. The request was approved in 4 days. The fastest the Human Collective's diplomatic office had ever processed anything. Because they had been waiting for exactly this kind of request, they were always ready. That was the thing about them. They had been getting ready for a very long time. And when they came back, they would come back on their own terms. To a galaxy that had spent 3 years reconsidering what it thought it knew about them. And they would come back not as refugees, not as a defeated species, not as anything the Verkai Dominion or the Galactic Council had ever quite managed to anticipate. They would come back as themselves, which had always, in the end, been the most dangerous thing about them.